Well, thank you. So as the first panel goes off stage, I'm really, really excited to introduce everyone to Natasha. Is she here? There she is. Natasha Korecki. Come on, Natasha. Natasha Korecki is an exciting new hire for us at Politico. She just joined last month from the Chicago Sun-Times, and I'm sure many of you have read her fantastic work. And she knows Chicago and Illinois politics better than anyone, and she is the perfect person to have on stage now to moderate this fascinating panel that we have next. And there she is.
I'm hiding behind you, sorry.
All right.
Thank you, Louisa. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here for my first Politico event, and thank you all for being here tonight. This has already been a really great conversation. We're really equally excited to have this very interesting panel here. Timely conversation about the future of social impact and panelists who live inside the world of Chicago politics and will be able to give us really great insight, I'm sure. So specifically, we have on stage Illinois State Representative Christian Mitchell, not the youngest state rep, but almost. Yes. 29 years old. I don't even want to think about that. And David Spielvogel, Senior Advisor to the Mayor of Chicago.
Good job.
Oh, thank you. Senior Advisor to the Mayor of Chicago, who earned the most unfortunate of nicknames, Mini Rom. I'm sorry. Also known as Rom's alter ego at times. Again, I apologize.
We're on the record tonight, so I'll be very behaved.
Let's start with
get him a cocktail, please.
Yeah, I know. Oh, you know what I should say?
Red
Before
wine,
we kick
please.
off, don't forget to tweet your questions to #PoliticoGenNext. And we'll be tracking your questions from a tablet here on stage. And let's jump right in. Christian, I'm going to start with you.
Perfect.
So as a reporter covering state politics and other things, all Illinois, I've been writing nonstop about the budget stalemate that's been going on. I'm curious, do you, from your experience, think that millennials are tuned into this? Do they know there's a stalemate? Do they care? And if not, what is their big issue?
Well, I think some millennials are tuned into it. So, for example, there are, let's say younger people. I'm going to go a little outside of the millennial box and say that there are folks right now who get what we call monetary assistance program grants or MAP grants. Who are smart enough to be going to college, who have the grades to be in and don't have the money to go. And that program has been slashed by this budget impasse, but frankly would have been slashed by the governor anyway, according to his introduced budget proposal. But it's going to touch everyone, whether or not it's touching you now. So for example, when I was growing up, we helped care for both of my grandparents who were very, very sick. And there are a bunch of people in Illinois right now who rely on a little in-home care assistance for their, say, elderly grandparent or parent. Who they help care for. And if that person all of a sudden isn't there, well, then they have to figure out how they rearrange their work schedule to make that work. There may be some millennials who rely on our child care assistance program who currently are seeing that slashed, or even people who work and provide, daycare could also be seeing that program slashed. But ultimately, if we're not investing in education and infrastructure, what's going to happen is we're going to lose our competitive advantage as the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. And when that happens, it's going to affect every industry that millennials are working in.
Well, I'm curious, do you hear from millennials?
I would say not as much as older folks or folks who are really seeing the services directly.
So those people are probably calling you more.
They are calling more. You'll occasionally get a tweet, or occasionally I'll run into somebody on the street around my age who will say, I don't know why you guys can't pass a budget.
And you say?
And my response is, well, you've got a governor who believes in governing by hostage. And, that's kind of a difficult person to negotiate with, because if you give up your lunch money now, they're going to ask for more lunch money next year. And what I also say is, you should get involved. Call the governor's office, call your state legislator, and make sure that they know why you care about this. But overall, it is older folks who are more engaged on this topic. I think part of it is that a lot of millennials have given up on politics.
Oh, that's interesting. It echoes what we heard on the first panel. So my question is for David. So as you sit there inside City Hall, running the government, behind the scenes, how do these social media causes and campaigns penetrate behind closed doors? Do you follow Twitter retweets? Do you follow Facebook likes the way politicians have always followed the mail that comes from their constituents. I mean, literally on Capitol Hill, they would have those postcards stacked up, and the senators and congressmen, they get, a little report each day. We got so many pro letters and so many anti letters. What do you do with those causes? Do they make it into your offices?
Yeah, so we definitely look at, how many of our postings people like, how many they retweet, and sort of the adoption of what we're saying online. But I think the more interesting part is, and I hadn't heard the term hashtag activism before tonight, so I learned something. But I think I know what it is because I deal with it all day long, and I think it's a very powerful tool. There are certainly, and this is probably more local, so the more mainstream reporters will cover citywide issues, and we certainly read the papers and follow the news on TV. But there's a lot of local issues that probably don't come up day to day in City Hall that through hashtag activism we sort of see that it's like bubbling up. There'll be economic development issues, there'll be a protest growing around a certain issue that maybe we just didn't know about, and learning about it in advance means that we could do something about it.
Okay, so you see it coming up on Twitter. Does the mayor do his own Twitter?
The mayor does not do his own Twitter.
So somebody sees it coming up on Twitter, and they're like, hey David, this is coming up on Twitter. So what happens next? What happens next? Walk us through it. So people are, hashtagging. So what happens?
Yeah, so if we see that there's anger growing about a certain issue, we have a whole team of folks who, depending on what the issue is, sort of focus on that issue, whether it's education, public safety, community engagement. And usually we know, Chicago is a big city, but it's very small, and you tend to know most people, or at least how to get to them. And we'll engage quickly because 90% of these problems are not really problems, or a misunderstanding, we didn't know about it, and through conversation we can deal with them before they become bigger and wind up on
you're
the front
doing it
page of
before
her
it
paper.
gets to the media, and you're sort of putting out the fire, and like Natasha isn't even aware that this has happened. But now
so when you say you engage, are you like direct messaging them, or are you like blocking them on Twitter?
Maybe we'll tweet at each other, but that's not. No, we use old school telephones. But I do want to say though, that there's another piece to this, which is we do a ton of data analytics, and what that allows us to do is scrape Twitter, Facebook, different social media sites, and actually find problems before any of us would ever see them.
Like what kind of problem would you find?
Health inspections. We do a lot of health inspections based on what we're finding online, outbreaks before they happen. They, created one around rodents, so there are certain, and I don't know all the details, but there are certain things you'll see pop up in certain geographic neighborhoods that are usually
hashtag rodents.
They usually precipitate a rodent outbreak, and so why not spend the money beforehand, which is a lot cheaper than after, and it's been copied by a lot of cities. So there are really two sides to this. One is me sitting at my computer reading Natasha and other people on Twitter, and the other is data analytics, trying to figure out problems before they happen.
So they're actually capturing different geographical locations and figuring out where the rats are.
Yep.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Geotagged is what it's called for the cool.
For the millennials.
Right.
I avoid direct messages because I think of Anthony Weiner, but that's just me. Doesn't seem like a good idea.
On behalf of America, thank you.
Well, one of the things we were talking about was, is there a specific policy that you could point to that's in, that you could say we're trying to attract millennials or respond to something that millennials have wanted?
Where's that?
You go.
I think a lot of I think we had a strong immigration agenda in the first campaign 5 years ago. I think a lot of the very specific policies that we've pushed on immigration grows out of what we're hearing from young folks. One example would be we opened up city jobs in the mayor's office and all our summer programming in the parks to Dreamers, which prior to 5 years ago people weren't really doing because there was a worry about the legality of it. And that came directly out of one of the focus groups we have with younger Chicagoans. So I think there's a lot of examples that feed into issues that the last panel was talking about.
Fascinating. What about the Divvy program? Is that just
What
across
about-
the board?
Well, I'm too old to be a millennial, but I think a lot of our transportation policy is geared toward a younger generation that doesn't own a car, that uses alternative forms of transportation to get around. So yes.
Okay.
Interesting.
Christian, you told me something really interesting. As a young person running for office, I had visions of these young people, massing and electing you. But you said actually you didn't think that the millennial vote was necessarily that instrumental in your election, that young people just aren't voting.
Yeah, so there was a really interesting piece I read, I want to say it was probably about a year and a half ago, and it was in The Atlantic, and it was this breakdown of a bunch of data, including some by the Institute of Politics at the Harvard Kennedy School. And what I found interesting about it was it said that 47% of millennials did not believe that politics could meet the scope of our present day challenges. Only 16% disagreed, right? So that's a large plurality of people like the people in this room who do not believe in politics as a vehicle. You've got people and it's something like 18% of the people at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government were actually going to go into public service. And to me, that was one of the more alarming set of statistics that I'd ever read, because part of the reason why I do this is because I say that I believe in government. And I know, there are not a lot of people who are willing to do that because, it's become in some ways very unpopular, but I believe it's the largest enterprise in which we enter together, and if we give up on that, we're giving up on ourselves. But there aren't a ton of people who believe that and feel that way. Now, me personally, I look at it and I say, if we're going to address global warming, then we've got to talk about urban sprawl and open housing policies and how we get more housing in areas of opportunity. And failing that, and failing a conversation where we figure out why we've been running and moving away from each other, we can't meet this large challenge. If we want to talk about education policy equally, we have to talk about housing policy. But a lot of millennials believe, look, I should go out and start my own tech company, I should go out and start my own firm, I'm going to drive change through innovation, and government is too slow and it's too archaic and it doesn't work for me and the expectations that I have for myself. I think that's a very, very bad thing, and I think it's frankly not accurate, but I understand why people feel that way. And so most of the people, if you're running an election campaign, you're focused on those 2 of 3 or 3 of 3 Democratic primary voters. That's on average going to be somebody who's, 35, at least 35, if not older. And those are the folks who are reliably going to come out to vote. That's the challenge of modern politics, is people just don't believe. And I know one of the panelists from the last panel, I want to say Mr. Clark mentioned that part of the frustration is that they don't believe they're going to get Social Security. I would argue that the real challenge is millennials believe our politics is just too small. That when we are talking about trying to fix a racial divide, or trying to fix, again, climate change, or trying to fix something as large scale as the challenges that we face in government, while we in Springfield are having a food fight, people don't believe that government can help, and thus they don't come out to vote.
So how do you recruit young people into government?
Relatively easily. I think you point out something interesting, and I don't know the answer to this, but I do, how I personally feel, federal and state government is I don't know what I would do to help. It's just sort of a morass of partisan bickering and trying to one-up each other. I don't feel that way on the local level. I don't know how much interaction you've had locally, but it's a lot of very committed people. I feel like we're doing stuff all day, every day, from picking up garbage to bigger things, like giving dreamers jobs and being the first city in the country to do that. But I do think there's probably a different sense of ability to get things done on the local level than there is certainly on the federal level and even on the state level. So we have a ton of young people. I mean, our summer fellows program, which is all millennials, usually in grad school, is oversubscribed, 10 to 1. People want to be a part of this. People leave the summer actually doing a project that we wind up implementing. And our whole office, some of them are here, are millennials. I mean, there's a lot of them. They're cheaper, but don't tell them that. But they're very smart, and I think the ideas they have, while they might need some help in crafting them into things we can actually get done, are the kinds of changes that cities are making across the world that are actually attracting more young people to them.
Like what?
Well, you mentioned transportation. I think we've changed the transportation infrastructure significantly in the city. Some people are upset about it. A lot of the younger generation likes it a lot. Urban planning, we just passed a very large transit-oriented development. ordinance which will promote density and smaller apartments near transit stops, which every city is starting to do. And it runs across the gamut. So those ideas tend to percolate from the younger folks, and then we just bring them through the traps.
And I want to be very, very clear. Like there are, so for example, at the state level, as frustrating as this budget impasse has been, one of the ways in which sort of hashtag activism affected me is, I remember sitting and watching some of the events that happened in Ferguson and with Eric Garner in New York. And so one of the things that I did was, through the help of my staff, almost all of whom are millennials, and my interns, was, we started pulling examples around the country of how some of this stuff has been dealt with. And one of the bills that we passed in Springfield I'm most proud of this year provided funding for body cameras, provided an independent investigation for officer-involved shootings, so that hopefully that there's some closure, because I remember seeing the outrage of people of color and other folks on Twitter about exactly what happened, and really understood that deeply. So
well, let me ask you though, was it the outrage of folks on Twitter,
sure,
or was it the street protests? I mean, what really made the difference?
So I would say the street protests are more effectual. And what I mean by that is it's one thing to send out a tweet with a hashtag, right? And that's important. It is an action step. But when you translate that down the continuum of escalation, when you are willing to put your actual body on the line, take time out of your day, take time off from your job, that's when when elected officials, I think, really start to take real notice. One of the things I remember, for example, is Occupy Wall Street. At the time I was a community organizer, I found the movement very exciting. We were finally going to start having conversations about the structural inequity in our country. And that's one of the things, by the way, according to polling, millennials are really, really concerned about. But it kind of fizzled off in this kind of Monty Python anarcho-syndicalist collective thing, and just fizzled out because there was no concrete set of demands that were actually being brought to public policymakers. And one of my pushbacks on hashtag activism is, great, but what are you going to do to physically touch your neighbor, to have a real on-the-ground conversation that translates into action that policymakers, that business leaders are going to notice and push for? Because otherwise, it can become white noise. And I think that we have to be willing and able to move beyond that. I think that Twitter can be an effective tool for getting real news out in real time. I think it can be an effective tool for organizing. The Obama did a great job at this, but it always translated that into an action, a vote, a volunteer hour, something that was tangible, that you could touch and that you could feel. And I think that when you are a young person, as I am fortunate to be, and as David is as well, and people see that you believe, that you think the system can be better than it is now, that's how you attract talent. And I've been fortunate to have a really great intern program of young people who have been willing to translate their energy, their drive into action, and we've been able to get some things done because of it.
I guess I'd just, to follow up on that, there was Occupy Chicago, and there was the NATO protests, and I am kind of interested in you talking a little bit about how Chicago handled that situation and some of the recent reports that we've seen about, it's been in the Sun-Times and the Chicago Reader, about spying authorized by the city and Chicago Police Department on certain protest groups, and how you negotiate that with trying to build trust in some of these people who are trying to be activists.
I mean, the mayor has been pretty clear from day one. He comes into this feeling like police are only effective if the community trusts them. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And you've seen that time and time again in history. I think the way NATO was handled, which is now being used as a model around the world, which is to allow abundant protest, allow people to speak their mind, allow them to take over the streets. We actually closed down streets so that people could march rather than making it some sort of territorial thing, is the way you do it. And that's the strategy we used then, and we're going to continue to use going forward.
Kind of like letting loose a little bit and allowing there to be a certain amount of expression.
And then you look at Ferguson, which is the exact opposite. The point is, if people want to be heard and want to speak their mind, they should be allowed that. There's shutting down a street to allow for that is a great way to let people be heard, to gather. It takes it from Twitter to the actual streets, which is something good. It's what made our country what it is today, and we're all for that.
Just circling back again, we were talking about protests versus Twitter. I feel like there's very often protests downtown. There's, either it's a union or there's Fight for 15 or there's someone. Is that sort of like, do you kind of put that aside as like, you're not really worried about that? It's kind of this contained thing versus if someone's like slamming you with a bunch of tweets and, hashtag whatever and creating something online, like which are you more likely to be worried about and to respond to?
I think if you see a growing chorus of people that are not all from one specific activist group, and I don't mean activist group, but one particular what's the word I'm looking for? Group that, like one particular union or taxi drivers or one specific group, you see it grow into a broader chorus, which you can see much more easily on social media than on the street. That's when it becomes a realization that it's an issue we should question ourselves. Should we do something different? Are we not getting our message out? And so I think that's, for us at least, that's more effective than just having one specific interest group march down the street and then go home.
So, and just following up on that question, and the state government level, I'm just curious, like if somebody is tweeting you specifically, are you just much more likely to see it because it's...
Yeah, well, so I run my own Twitter, so in part it's a good way to contact me, and I'll make a decision as to whether or not I'm going to respond. I might go and click on the person's Twitter profile and kind of do a quick scroll and determine, okay, 6 tweets in, you're absolutely insane. We're not going to answer this one, right? Just like this person's crazy, he's tweeting a bunch of like. On the other hand, if it's a substantive question. Or a question about policy, or a chance to potentially rebut and attack in a public way, because these things start to going into another re-election campaign, and some of those things will pop up. I might take the time to answer. I view Twitter as in some ways as a potential canary in a coal mine. And the reason I say potential is sometimes it just fizzles out and it never grows into something more than that. But it's a really interesting tool to kind of see the pulse of what might be happening around a particular issue in a particular community. But again, for me, if you are not willing to take that next step, I'm not sure it's as effective as it could be. I consider it an organizing tool to gather potential energy, but then the question is how it gets released.
So that's really interesting. So you're not very skeptical about it. You're very open to it, and you're saying actually it can be more meaningful than a one-group protest, perhaps in part because you can see where these people are coming from, who they're affiliated or not affiliated with. That's really interesting. I wonder... one thing that's amazing to me this year is that you have a septuagenarian candidate for president winning the Millennial Vote, according to the polls. What does it take as a politician running for office to appeal to the Millennial Vote?
Well, I would argue the answer is authenticity. And I would argue...
Define that. Everybody says, I don't know what that means.
Look, one of the things that I said during my my re-election kickoff was, it's not just good enough to talk about the problem. The question is, do you have a real solution that people can look at and say it's credible? And do you have a relatable story? Part of the challenge, I would argue, of our politics is you don't have enough good people who are willing to put their name on a ballot and run for office. And it totally makes sense, because now you have to go back and review your Facebook, and there's a picture involving a red cup and a keg stand, and you're like, oh, is this fatal? You make... That's what a friend told me. That wasn't me.
That's a huge point.
Yeah.
You think about, people growing up, and they know what's on their Facebook page.
Right.
And the idea of that somehow becoming public or dogging them,
and that may change at some point. I think a generation or so from now, everyone will have the red cup picture, and therefore it won't be an obstacle. My broader point, though, is that I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I understand struggle. I understand hardship. I understand what it's like to not quite know where your next paycheck's coming from. There are a lot of millennials who are going through that right now because of the recession, because of other downturns. You've got folks who are still living with their parents or still trying to figure out how they get onto an actual career path, and being able to speak to those people and say, here's something. One of the things Bernie Sanders says is, look, free college for everybody. Now, Hillary will turn around and say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It shouldn't giving it to Donald Trump's kids.
Isn't that a problem? I mean, think about this. He is tweeting things that fit in 140 characters. Free college for everybody. Yeah. And she's like, well, wait a minute. We have to think about it and, here are all the issues on the one hand and the other and, the areas of gray. So are we just basically eliminating the possibility of complex thought in politics?
Well, I wouldn't blame that on social media. I would blame that. I'm serious. I would blame that on.
He's being rewarded, right? He has these very simple declarative messages.
A lot of people do, but I mean, the challenge is that I'd argue, and this is why, again, I think hashtag activism is helpful, but not the answer. It's the decline of civil society. If you want to change politics, if you want to make sure that the way candidates respond to the electorate is entirely different. If you had a bunch of people who came to every town hall meeting where I knew instead of having to go and talk to rich people all day and raise a bunch of money to send glossy mailers because they can't get into your building, that would change the game. And you'd have a chance to talk about the nuance of an issue. You'd have a chance to engage with people where they live. The bottom line is you are rewarded for brevity, you're rewarded for simplicity, so you're not at all wrong about that, but it's because people don't take the time to research candidates, research issues, engage, in no small part because they don't believe that government is or can deliver for them. If we change that attitude, all of a sudden, we have a very different political system. I don't know if that answered your question. You're looking at me like maybe not.
Well, I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you think that we're driving politicians to the 140-character soundbite, and that's what the system is set up to?
If you've ever been to a press conference with my boss, does not adhere to 140 characters. No, look, I think younger people, and I'm as my younger staff pointed out to me multiple times today, I am not a millennial. I'm too old. But I do think younger people up to being 5 years older than you should be to be a millennial look for people who are smart on the issues and are authentic about it. I do agree. Like, you disagree with George Bush on everything, but he was a pretty authentic guy. Same thing with Barack Obama. And I think that's what people want in their elected leaders, someone who tells them like it is and talks about actual issues. I think some of Bernie Sanders, the interest in him is just he's screaming and telling you like it is. I worked for Howard Dean. Like, it's just people like that. In the end of the day, I don't think it carries you all the way across the line, but that's where we are today. And so I think as long as you keep talking about the issues, both of our campaigns were very, very policy driven. We talked about new issues every other day, made new proposals, and I think that's some of why people like the mayor is because he's always driven to buy policy to make change, whether you agree with it or not.
So whose decision was it to outfit him in that sweater for that infamous commercial? That's where he told it like it was, right?
No, I think that was he was just making honest. Maybe that's what was at the top of his drawer that morning. I don't know.
Well, just describe for us inside your offices what platforms is the mayor on? What platforms are you on, or your office is on? Like, where are you engaging, and sort of where is the future headed? Is it more towards Twitter? Is it more towards Facebook? Something else? Snapchat? We heard a lot about. Are you using that?
I don't know Snapchat, but
I don't use Snapchat for political purposes.
Apparently, all the activists are though.
Apparently, I should get. I'm trying to figure out how you drive a message in 10 seconds. I mean, 15 seconds pre-roll on YouTube is already pretty difficult. But we do. I do my own Instagram. I do Twitter. I do Facebook. We also have a campaign and an office Facebook page. So we do all of them. But it seems like a lot of the action is going toward Twitter. Just in my very kind of limited understanding of the medium, it seems like Twitter advertising, those sorts of things are moving in that direction, as well as kind of, Snapchat pre-roll stuff.
And what about mainstream media? Where does it fit in for you?
Well, we read all of our local papers. I mean, religiously in our office, we get, Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune, Politico Playbook, especially the daily version, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. It's still a medium that we consume pretty heavily.
We definitely consume all of it, but the traditional papers are like social media, a big deal from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. because that's when the content is fresh. Yep. And then we sort of move to whatever's 2 seconds old on Twitter. So they've got to decide how they're going to play with that, but it's changing. And a lot of reporters now at the traditional papers are tweeting stuff all day to share news. So.
Well, what about if you want to make the most impact where do you go? I mean, what is the outlet that will make the most impact? Is it a traditional news source?
I think it depends on content and audience, right? So if you've got, for example, you're in the middle of a campaign and you've got like a sharp, clever, witty rejoinder, you probably want to go to Twitter with that. If you want to do something more substantive, maybe you try for a blog or a Facebook post or even, you know, an op-ed in one of the dailies, I would say.
Same. Yeah, you know, some different reporters know different issues better, as you know, so you want a reporter who understands the background of what you're covering. So the daily papers are great for that. We push a lot to television because television can cover stories in a different way, and a lot of people still watch TV. So, you know, it depends on the story.
You're not going to the YouTubers yet? Because apparently they're more influential.
We have a YouTube channel. I don't spend a lot of time watching it, but...
And we do a video address fairly frequently. This is actually probably my most popular communication medium. Is we do like a just quick 2 to 3 minute video address. Here's what happened in Springfield. Here's what's going on. Here's a funny story, and people love it.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. It's been really interesting, and I'd love to have the same conversation like 3-4 years from now. I'm sure it'll be completely different.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you all very much. And again, thank you so much to Deloitte for this wonderful opportunity. And I hope that you'll all stay and have a drink and socialize and chat with us. It's been wonderful to be here with you all. Thank you. Thank you.